All right, everyone. So now we are off to our final installment of the religion section, and that would be Buddhism. And Buddhism, a very interesting religion now. We have a little bit more of a guy that we have some historical evidence about, so let's get right to it. So, Buddhism was founded by the Buddha, but he was a real guy, and we actually have a bunch of historical references to him. And his name is Siddhartha Gautama. Now, he was from Lumbini, which was actually probably in Nepal, but his father's kingdom was also going to be in part of India as well. Now, his father had supposedly heard some type of seer or fortune teller, if you will, tell him that bad things would kind of befall his son if he ever left home. So he's actually imprisoned, if you will, um, in his father's palace. Now, the palace, which is supposedly this structure is built on top of the foundations of it today, was actually a palace and grounds, and everything evidently was wonderful. He grew up, he was super rich, he had a wife and child, of which we never really find out. It is assumed that his wife actually becomes a nun, if you will, and no information about his son exists, so there is no actual belief that any descendants of Buddha still live. Now, at one point, he is able to kind of sneak out of his imprisonment and see the real world. And seeing the real world really messed him up. He supposedly saw an old man, a sick man, and then finally a corpse. And this really disturbed him. And for Siddhartha, it seemed everywhere he looked, he saw death. And that really shook him up to the point where, he, as a Hindu, had a spiritual crisis because for him it didn't seem that these less fortunate were taken care of, and he saw the caste system that was in place and he didn't like that either. And he basically really has an incredible mental breakdown. And so what he's going to do is leave. He abandons his wife and child, and he goes out to become an ascetic. Now, for those of you who don't know, an ascetic is someone that supposedly to gain greater spiritual connections, that you deny yourself food, water, even clothing. And Buddha did this, but he found that his mind basically was not able to function properly. And so he stops being an ascetic and he starts seeking out holy men, and they don't have the answer for him, these various priests and whatnot. And so, what he really focuses on doing is personal meditation, and that he really prays to the gods and looks deeply within himself. And then finally, he has a breakthrough. Supposedly, everything hits him. And when he was in the city of Bodh Gaya, up here is the temple of Bodh Gaya. Um, and this supposedly was the tree that he was sitting in, and everything came to him. And he would spend the remaining, at that point, anywhere from 40 to 50 years of his life. It depends. I have ages anywhere from 75 to 85, which is pretty remarkable. He would spend teaching his ideas. And in many ways, what he was trying to do was not necessarily deny Hinduism, but kind of reform it into a different direction. Kind of similar, and there's often a lot of similarities between he and Jesus. Now, he would continue teaching until he finally would die of natural causes. Now, Buddhism did really well for a while, but eventually it almost died out. The other guy I mentioned here is a man by the name of Ashoka. I have it a little out of order. Ashoka was a king of the Mauryan Empire, and he's really, really important because Buddhism by this point became a tiny little sect and almost died out. Ashoka was a great king who won a great battle, but when he had heard that his forces were responsible for killing over 100,000 men, he went into a spiritual crisis of his own and basically discovered Buddhism. And in discovering Buddhism, he converted. And the most important thing he did is he paid for Buddhist missionaries to travel across the world to spread the religion. So, despite the fact of it being founded for the most part in northern India and initially spreading throughout India, there are very few Buddhists in India. Most of them are in like Nepal, Tibet, and China, with a large amount in Japan as well as the United States of America. So this was a religion that really would spread very rapidly, one of the largest religions in the world today. Now, Buddhism was a little bit different. It had some similarities, if you will, with Hinduism, but it was based on, you have a couple number things here. The most important is the Four Noble Truths. Truth number one, the world is full of suffering and pain. However, we understand the root cause of this pain is desire and attachment to material goods and wealth. The way to end the pain is to end attachment and desire. And if you can do this, you will attain nirvana, which is actually a state of wanting nothing. And at that point, you become a Buddha. Buddha was not very egotistical. He felt anyone could become a Buddha. And that's really, really important. What you notice in the Four Noble Truths in ending suffering, that you do not have to be of a certain caste. Now, Buddha believed in reincarnation, but that was only if you didn't get it right. He really didn't work on you going up or down. And for Buddha, it was anyone could achieve enlightenment. Now, this is a big deal. This is what made it so popular early on, much like, as again, we see the parallels of Christianity, Jesus helping the poor, helping the downtrodden. And that's exactly what Buddha was doing as well. And this still belief, he doesn't necessarily call it the Brahma, but it is a universal soul that you want your soul to unite with. And as you see here, obtain nirvana. Now, how do you do this? Well, you have to follow the 5 precepts. And I undertake the training rule to abstain from killing. So this is nonviolence, and also all Buddhists, if you're a real Buddhist, you are a vegetarian. You will kill no one. And most of them are actually vegan, that they will have nothing from an animal. Okay, so that's really important. They will not steal. I'm going to actually jump real quick down to number 4, not to abstain from false speech, so not lying and not being cruel with your words, and no alcohol, which actually goes back and I mentioned it in Islam as well. The biggest and most revolutionary of all these beliefs, though, was the I undertake the training rule to avoid from sexual contact. This is the first religion that actually explicitly details rules for non-violence against women and things like rape and stuff like that. It was tremendously important, and if you look in areas in which Buddhism was popular, you will see kind of protection of women. Now, it's not perfect. China was an area that would struggle with this, but if you look at Tibet, Nepal, and even Japan, it was very, very interesting that you see that. So these are the precepts that you must follow. And what goes along with that, if you see on the right here, is deep meditation. If you eventually want to become a full-fledged Buddhist and really want to obtain nirvana, you need to become a monk or a nun, as we would translate the words. But daily meditation is very important to the soul. So here we're eliminating a lot of these gods. Now, the 5 precepts are what's going to push your actions. And as you see here, it's right understanding, right thought, right meaning, correct speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. So what Buddhism is all about is this deep meditation, this lots of effort and trying hard, and living a relatively modest life. That you have enough food to survive, you're not trying to go out and become all rich and powerful, and that you treat others equally. And if you do this and follow the precepts, that eventually you can obtain or attain nirvana. Now, there are 2 basic forms of Buddhism that exist today. There's Theravada, which is the truest form, which is only used, which is Pali language, and it focuses on the Tripitaka. Buddha was just like Jesus. He never wrote anything down. Things were written down by his followers, and those were assembled into the Tripitaka. And so some people feel to truly follow Buddhism that you actually have to learn the Pali language that was originally set in. Then you have Mahayana Buddhism, which is really popular in China and Japan, where Buddha himself is looked as a god, and you use translated text. I want to zoom in here, though. The top Buddhist in the world is a man by the name of the Dalai Lama. Now, we're going to talk about him when I talk about China a little bit more. But Buddhism is about responsibility to yourself. So when you pray and you meditate, you're not really doing that for in a congregation, it's you. And I love this quote. He says, when you think everything is someone else's fault, you will suffer a lot. When you realize that everything springs from only yourself, you will learn both peace and joy. And this is really a hallmark of Buddhism, that it's on you. And you see this in Hinduism as well, and we saw it in Chinese ancestor worship, and you saw it in Shinto, and you saw it in um, Taoism, that this is on you, that the focus is on you as an individual. And that's where Buddhism is really different. But the cool part about Buddhism is what I like is its architecture. People love making statues of Buddha and temples so that people can get away. And the concept of a Buddhist temple is somewhere where you go to get away from kind of the hustle and bustle so that you can get back closer to the religion. So here's some really cool one. Here's the Wat Rung Kun Temple in Thailand. It's just beautiful, and you see all this stone, and it's carved with these dragons and this bridge over this water here. And this kind of is a little creepy, but these are all these people raising their hands up in prayer and offering goods to Buddha. I think it's kind of cool. Then you have the Angkor Wat Temple, which might be the most famous in the world. This was built deep in the jungle of Cambodia by the Khmer civilization, who were devout Buddhists. So they built this entire temple structure for the sole purpose of people coming here to pray. And it's absolutely gorgeous, as you see here. And I have a little close up where you see all these different statues of Buddha. And what I like about Buddha is you see him in one of two places. One is of him in that strict, when I show you Japan, you see him very reserved and praying, which Buddha was. But Buddha also enjoyed life, because life for him was a gift, and it was okay to enjoy it, a little bit of a holdover for Hinduism. So what I like is that you often see pictures of Buddha smiling, and I like to smile and have fun, so I think it's pretty cool too. This is one of the more famous statues. This is the Kamakura Buddha in Kamakura, Japan. Japan is huge in Buddhism. He actually, in Japan, many of the people who worship Shinto actually worship Buddha as a god, so you see a little cross over there. But the biggest thing that was ever built to Buddha is this guy right here. This is the Great Lashan Buddha in China. This was built on the Lashan River, which the whole purpose of it was to calm the river. And so this guy is 233 feet tall. This thing is over 1,000 years old. It was carved right out of the solid rock. And you see how huge it is. And just to give you an idea, to a close-up here, that's just like the guy doesn't even reach the toe. Again, we go back here. So that foot is right down there, okay? And then you see just how massive it is. And so this is a really interesting religion. Again, something we're going to talk about in class and kind of contrast it. But in summary of this unit, that's why it's important to understand these religions, because it really gets us to understand how people act and what they hold dear. All right, guys, I'll be seeing you soon, and make sure you get your questions, comments, and see you in class.